Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Campus Conversation Shawnee Community College podcast. I am Kevin Huntsberger, Executive Director of Public Information and Marketing, and our president, Dr. Tim Taylor, joins us for more on the conversation and kind of putting a bow, if you will, on the conversations that we've had several podcast episodes on. We're looking at our strategic plan and other industries and how it all fits together, not just with higher education, but specifically here at Shawnee College.
Yes, sir. When we first started this journey, actually, when I first started wanting to talk about this, I thought about, we'll do this in like a convocation episode, like an hour. Clearly, our content is way more than an hour. I mean,
lots of research went into this.
Yeah, and if you start trying to compress topic really as complex as this, it kind of makes it very difficult to understand, and a lot of times the message is lost. And so I really love that we've been able to talk about the industry, how higher ed has changed in the first episode, and what the future looks like in the second. And then looking around at the three industries that have changed due to some of the similar influences. And this one, which really is probably the most important of all, is why. It answers that question, why. I mean, we talk about in the strategic plan what we want to accomplish, and in some ways how we want to accomplish it, and how we're going to measure the success. But we really often don't do a good job of talking about the why. And so what I want to do with today's episode is use the first 5 episodes that we've created and tie them together and really make a very strong connection to the why our strategic plan is the way it is. And before we get into this, again, this is based off of work from Scott Van Pelt and Dr. Art Levine. But if you think about when that book was published and our strategic plan clearly came out before the book was published. And so this is Art, Scott, if you're listening, I love your ideas, but I didn't steal them. There are similar ideas that I had, but I love the way you put a bow on this. But as a group, and I'm glad you're able to let me borrow it. But from a perspective of a Shawnee College president and the board, these are the real important conversations that people need to have to understand why we're doing what we're doing and try to position ourselves for the future.
Because this will impact more than just obviously the administration and the faculty and the staff, our students, and ultimately our communities, and not only in Southern Illinois, but our global community as well. So absolutely.
And it's nice to be noted in some ways, I think, over the course of time as being leaders in our roles. And we're starting to see some of that with some of our institutional departments here, our institutional research, institutional effectiveness departments, really kind of a leader in the state in terms of what we're being able to do and the research that we're being able to produce over some of the other research tiered organizations, like our Southern's R2 organization. There's some R3 organizations, but our data is really good. So and people are looking at that. And then, of course, our budget and finance stuff is starting to really be taken note of. And we've got that new cost model that looks at things it looks at the minutia of the cost, which is very unique and will eventually rise to the top of people's interests. So we're doing things. Let's talk about why we're doing them.
Sure. Sounds good.
So, the look back was just to kind of understand how higher ed changed. To look forward was to look at how economics, technology, and demographics were impacting the future. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about the technology. Then when we looked around, we looked at how the music, film, and print industries changed as a result of these same factors. So what I want to talk about now is really, let's tie them all together. What are the commonalities amongst all of these things, and what are the differences? And so let's start there. I think you can pretty much see that there was a similar path to disruption for all three industries, right? All built successful business models during the industrial era, all faced and overcame adversity from competitors and regulators, and then they were undone by the digital revolution, right? So the differences of the three, I think, or differences between the three industries, first of all, was timing. The news industry was in the first industrial revolution, and the film and music was in the second. There was a geographic difference as well. The music and film industries were national, kind of international in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
The news was local.
Yeah.
And even though the news was local, they were also vulnerable to demographic population shifts. Migration impacted subscription revenues, and economic shifts caused some stores to close and things like that. The financial models were also a little bit different, where the music and film industry made money by selling content, and the newspaper industry made money off ads.
Mm-hmm.
And then the response to competition was also a little bit different. The music industry still partnered with radio. The film industry still partnered with TV, but the newspaper industries owned both until they were limited by regulators.
Yeah.
And then after that separation, the news, the radio, and TV competed for the customers.
Right. Yes.
And so the competition for consumers didn't exist after the regulation of the music and film industry. So that's a big kind of difference. So those were the differences, I think. So, because when you're trying to use analogies like the music, film, and print area, people always want to look at the differences and how those differ from higher ed. Well, there's also commonality, so let's talk about those as well. I think all three developed business models during the industrial age, the industrial revolution, which reflected the practices of that age. The assembly line production processes, fixed time, the distribution models were all still in that era. They tenaciously, I guess, really clung to a model and its products, albums. Music industry wanted to hold to that. Physical movies, the newspapers, they held on to that. They loved it. They tried to drive it through until the model broke, right?
Right.
And so that's another commonality. They all used the same strategy to try to respond to these changes. They tried to make minor piecemeal adjustments. The piecemeal adjustments, I think, was to the business model, and they tried to reform it. They tried to repair it and adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of similar. We're trying to adapt to the model. So I think that strategy that they use for the business model is also part of the commonality. They all doubled down on that reform, repair, and adaptation strategy, even when it was clear that holistic organizational change was needed.
Mm-hmm.
They did not alter their business model either in the face of those changes. Most of the time, right. They waited till they were forced to.
Yeah.
All were completely disrupted by digital technology.
Yes.
All.
Yes.
Were completely disrupted by digital technology. They did recognize the magnitude of the change that was coming. It happened behind their back, really. They just kept doing business as usual.
Didn't want to believe it or accept it or
they
whatever.
They didn't recognize. Because they didn't recognize the magnitude. It didn't create the energy for them to put in that they needed to change or transform. They thought, well, this is just a fad, or we're going to be able to adapt. We're going to be, I think they assumed that they could adapt out of it. So I think you saw short-term organization transitional strategies pop up, like Blockbuster. How it kind of worked. It extended the life of the business model some, but in the end, it failed. And so did these organizations. All failed in the face of digital revolution, and they adopt a flurry of minor remedies and solutions. Essentially, they threw the solutions at the wall, and when nothing stuck, they assumed it was the consumer approval of what they were currently doing. I think they all engaged in what I would call defeating behaviors. They tried to mirror tomorrow from yesterday, thinking short term, cutting costs instead of investing in the future. That's important. That's one of the key elements of our plan. Is we're not cutting costs. We're trying to invest in people, in programs and services. They neglected to recognize changing or evolving consumer behavior. They ignored the emergence of competitors. They failed to recognize the arrival and power of new digital technologies, which was particularly shocking in a world where competitors used algorithms, AI, and big data to service the consumers. The revisioning of these industries and replacement solutions came from outside the industries. Google, Facebook, Spotify, Netflix, BuzzFeed, etc. Instead of from within. Beyond the digital technologies, consumer preferences drove replacement. So consumers chose 24/7, 365 access over fixed time. Consumers chose mobile over stationary devices. Consumers rather wanted their own produced content over user produced content. They want personalized content over one size fits all. And then they like unbundled content over bundled content. I think all three industries are still under transformation. Mm-hmm. And while the outcomes are unknown, the future still promises to be digital. So that's those three. Mm-hmm. What's the implications for higher ed?
Yeah.
I think you're asking, I'm going to say what I think. Okay?
Sure.
So the demographics and economics are not likely, I don't think, to disrupt the current higher education institutional model. They did not really disrupt the music, film, or newspaper model. It caused them to adapt more than disrupt. And so for Shawnee College, looking at our demographics, there is some potential where it could, it's causing us to adapt, but it's not going to really cause us necessarily to disrupt or change our model, although it could put a lot of pressure on us to do so, as long as we're moving. But the shrinking demographics in particular, the shift and migration from people from the east and Midwest to the south and west is real and mm-hmm. something that we need to pay attention to. But I'm not sure it's going to cause the pressure for disruption for the college moving forward. The digital revolution is going to occur in two stages. And really the first stage is just about complete. It's initially powered by mobile devices and the internet, but the next gen is AI, VR, and AR. Mm-hmm. And big data. Big data is a key piece of that. In higher ed, the second stage is not yet sufficiently developed, I don't think, to advance some of the things that we wanted to do, but it's coming, and it's coming quick. It's likely reckless to think higher ed will escape the whole or in part the fate of the music, film, or newspaper industries without some sort of disruption. I think.
Do you think higher ed, or has higher ed gone through, all of these other industries many years ago, in some cases decades ago, started going through these changes, these disruptive facets? Where's higher ed in that pecking order, if you will?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So, we saw obviously, the evolution of records and 8 tracks. We talked all about that, and then how it's all streaming now. Has higher education had those bumps in the road before and had to make changes? I'm still relatively new to higher education in terms of the employment side of it. So, in your 30 plus years, have you seen significant enough changes where you would call that a disruptive change?
No. Yeah. I mean, even with the evolution of the internet and online courses and programs, what you're seeing in most online programs is either an asynchronous or a synchronous delivery of the same content mm-hmm. in the same way. So people are faculty, teachers are duplicating what they do in a classroom or in a lab online.
Gotcha.
And they're not really taking advantage of the strengths of those media. Mm-hmm. And now with AI and bots and VR, there's so many different ways to approach how learning happens, and it doesn't have to be in that lecture kind of methodology. And that's what we're seeing from some of our private competitors, is they're actually innovating differently and not duplicating what currently existed. So we've done the adaptation stuff in higher ed, and that's what we're kind of doing now, is trying to adapt. What we need to really look at is a business model that is vastly different. And I use that term loosely, vastly, but it has to be different than what we're currently doing. And I think I'll explain more when we get into our strategic planning goals. Yeah. But that's a great question. Higher ed hasn't adapted. Now, I think you are seeing a proliferation of institutions. Well, are you familiar with the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, where 20% of people do 80% of the work? Well, I think we're starting to see a lot of higher education institutions recognize where we're at. And many see disruption coming. 80% no.
Gotcha.
Maybe more than that.
Yeah.
So we're at that beginning stages of where you're seeing higher education institutions starting to really look at the model differently, and that's why there's so many things that's popping up. And I'll get into in just a minute.
Sure.
But it's kind of a fun time to be in higher ed if you're a creator or an innovator or somebody who wants to try something new. Now is a great time to be in it, in the higher education space. In terms of disruption, and we got to keep disruption different from adaptation. Adapt,
Yeah.
boom, disruption hits, right?
Yeah.
So disruption began outside the industry, right? In the music, film, and newspaper areas. Higher ed, it looks like adaptive change, I just explained this, the emergence of an expansion of transitional organizations like for-profit online management firms. Many people probably heard of Anthology, Wiley, 2U, Pearson. There's a group called Academic Partnerships, BISC. These 5 or 6 companies control about 80 or 90% of the online management stuff, and they're starting to partner with other higher education institutions to do build and manage internet-based programs. And this will eventually lead, in my opinion, to disruptive change.
Okay. These
management companies, because they're creating content that's different. And I would encourage people to look at what these companies are doing and how they're doing them. They're not going to be they're the kind of the blockbusters.
Okay.
They're help propping it up, and they'll provide that transition to, in my view, of what we're moving forward. Partnerships in higher education and for-profit education companies historically have been in the area of auxiliary services. Things like there were a burgeoning number of finance and technology and admissions and things like that, services. We're now seeing companies that are emerging and partnering with universities to provide gaps in what they're currently providing, like in career education. They're providing other enrichment type of programs to respond to unmet consumer demands and desires. Some universities, mostly private, are using companies like Coursera to provide entry into the dual credit space. And so we've got some university, you look confused. So some universities are saying, well, we want to do dual credit, and we're going to use Coursera as that platform to deliver it. And because Coursera is private, not bound by regional boundaries, they can come in and do whatever they want. Now, some will speculate that they're not as rigorous as courses on campus, but I think the same argument was made about MP3s when Napster came out. The 96K bit wasn't as good as the 320 kilobit, and now there's no kilobits at all. And so we got to remember those lessons as we move forward. Just because the content may not be there now, with the proliferation of this new technology, AI, VR, and things like that, it may not take but 1 or 2 iterations or generations of technology before it does become better.
Yeah.
And so we got to worry about that in higher education. So beyond disruption, I think these 3 cases demonstrate a profound impact on government regulation as well. even though they managed to adapt their business models of the music and film and newspaper industries, at least for a short amount of time, they were severely altered by the courts and regulatory agencies like the FCC, FTC, and so on. The same potential exists for higher ed. Just came back from the Higher Learning Commission, listened to a whole conversation about what was going on at the federal government level. And there's certainly a lot of concern about college pricing, student debt, inequity in both access and graduation rates, widely criticized. In fact, and I'll use this joke in the next podcast when we talk about this, but that's one thing the feds have been able to agree on in the last 8 years, is that higher ed's not doing well.
Who do they blame, or do they?
They blame the presidents, the boards,
Okay.
the
I didn't know
universities.
if this was a problem that they are internalizing and going to try to fix, or is it something that they're passing the buck? So I kind of knew, but...
No, they blame the higher ed institutions.
Sure.
So the three cases, I think, at this point really point to the type of change higher ed is likely to experience in the next few years. The rise of anytime, anyplace consumer-driven content and source-agnostic, unbundled, personalized education paid for by subscription is what we're looking at probably at some point soon. This was the same conclusion, though, from our look forward. So if you listen to that episode, that's what we said. I still believe it, and I think that it's even more so.
So when you say, that kind of unbundled subscription, elaborate a little bit more on that for folks that maybe didn't hear that episode.
Well, we talk about unbundled content. I mean, if you think about the music industry, it's went from album, which was a bundled bunch of music, to MP3s, to streaming now, where you can get any song that you want 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
With film, you can get any movie that you want 24/7, 365. If you think about the newspaper business, you can get something that concentrates specifically on, for me, I like Cubs. So they got the Bleacher Report that's Cubs centered. They've got Cubby. The Cardinals probably have the same thing, although their team doesn't win as much. But I'll probably hear from that one. But I mean, you can get really customized content. You don't have to buy a whole newspaper anymore to read about the success of your local teams or of your favorite teams. And so that's what unbundled content is. They've taken an entire newspaper and unbundled it and kind of stream it out based off of what it is. So that's what unbundled content is. It's 24/7, 365 access. The streaming technology is able to provide that opportunity for consumers to get the information, consume the information the way they want it, when they want it, and how they want it. And that's really important.
Has higher ed started experimenting with this?
That's what we're doing. Hey, let me get to the strategic.
Okay.
That's
Gotcha.
The unbundled content piece. That's the competency-based stuff. And I'll get back to that.
Sure,
in a minute.
absolutely.
So let's talk about what I would say five profound realities for higher education in looking at and trying to draw the parallels to, or at least increase the connection between the parallels that we've talked about historically. First thing is institutional control of higher education will likely diminish as consumer power increases. So why is that? Well, I think if you think about the advent of global digital knowledge economy, the number of content producers and disseminators gave rise to consumer choice, right? So the consumers had choice over what, when, where, and how, and the content they consumed, and historically the dominant institution diminished in importance, and control. So that's likely to happen in higher ed. Clearly, the music, film, and newspaper industries, the industrial era was about institutions, was about the producers, was about the production of content. In contrast, the knowledge age focuses on the users of the contents, the consumers, the consumption. The consumer becomes the dominant force in this model, not the industry. and institutional control declines when that happens. So the same transition, I think, is likely to happen in higher ed.
Do you worry though, because we talked about before, anyone now with a phone can make a movie, they can make a video, they can make music, they can make news, and I use air quotes for those who are listening. Could higher ed be part of this, where we do have the satirical, we do have the comedy side of things, the maybe the less credible? Does higher ed fall into that same trap of people thinking they're being, because I do think that some people do watch videos and consume the news and they think that it is legitimate. Does higher ed, obviously there are regulations out there, but does that fall through the cracks eventually?
Well, I think if you look at the cycle, that is likely to happen, at least at the beginning. But if you think about like the film, music, and print industries, you see a proliferation of new providers, and then reputation takes over.
Yeah.
And then the consumers start to rely on specific companies based off of what they receive and is consistent with what their expectations are.
Gotcha.
Like Netflix is really has done an excellent job really of modifying their business model based off of consumer demand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were the first to get into the movie rental business, where they shipped it to you, but it was still videotape and CDs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then they actually shifted to the digital stream, and that reliability that they created confidence, consumer confidence, and they continued to engage with Netflix. And then other industries started copying.
Gotcha.
And so the ones that remain are the ones that consumers have confidence in and can give that consumer what they want, when they want it, how they want it. And so that's the lesson.
Gotcha.
And so in terms of higher ed, though, and this is breaking off probably into some of the podcasts that we want to do with employers.
Right.
But here's the thing with higher ed. If you ask employers, what are you looking for from the graduate? And I know you've heard this 100 times, and most people who probably listen to this podcast heard this from me 100 times. But they'll tell you, and we'll prove it because we'll bring them in here and I won't lead them. Mm-hmm. What are you looking for from a graduate? And they'll tell you things like communication. They'll talk about writing. They'll talk about solving complex social problems. They'll talk about showing up for work on time and demonstrating some skills and things like that. But to solve complex social problems, it doesn't require you to sit in a classroom to do. Mm-hmm. You can practice writing on your own.
Right.
You can practice solving problems with math, and there's multiple ways to do that. Organizations that find a way to engage students, maybe through gaming technology or other adaptive learning techniques, and become reliable for that student to be, or that individual to solve problems or communicate or write, they're going to make space. You see that right now in LinkedIn. You got a lot of LinkedIn badges that you can get. You can practice communicating and you learn about how things work. We're seeing those things pop up over and over and over again. Right now, LinkedIn is a social media company that a lot of people have confidence in. Mm-hmm. And so I could see a company like that partnering with other private industries, creating alternate content that helps people solve problems, that helps people communicate, that helps people write. And all of a sudden, higher education is now left out as the older, this is the joke, used to be Blockbuster.
Right.
Well, not even Blockbuster. It used to be, Gannett News or something.
Yeah.
So I think that's the danger. And that's why we have to be very entrepreneurial. We have in higher education have to lead this change. We are currently the experts on how people learn. How do we adapt that product? How do we adapt our services and programs in a way that will really engage, excite, and help the consumer learn?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest challenge that we have.
Right. Yeah.
So, again, back to the three industries, the universal access to digital devices, the internet. Students seek the same things they're getting from music in the newspapers, in the film. In all three industries, consumers chose around the clock access over fixed time, right?
Sure.
All three industries. Clear.
Yeah.
Can you debate it?
No.
It's clear. Consumers also chose anywhere mobile access over fixed locations. Not debatable, really, is it?
No.
Consumers also prefer consumer-determined content over producer-determined content. So the ability for the consumer to develop and say, I want to learn this and this and that, that will override us saying, you need to learn this. And so that can't be debated either in those three industries. Individualized content, tailored to Kevin Huntsberger, tailored to Tim Taylor. I didn't expect that to come. But they want it individualized to their own needs.
Yeah.
Not everybody has the same needs or wants or desires. And so they like individual content over uniform content. Unbundled over bundled. And of course, low cost over high cost. With the exception of luxury goods. I mean, I think something like the Boston Globe, the luxury paper, some people will choose those luxury items over, but it's a niche market.
Yeah.
All these things will likely happen to higher education and us. Research done by, I can't remember the first name, Dean, it was about 2012. They were doing a research on students' use of digital devices, the digital natives, not the immigrants. But what they're saying and what they found is the digital natives prefer anytime, any place access over locations and times.
So in other words, they want to log in at home. They want to log in from the beach. They don't want to necessarily have to drive to a campus and sit in a classroom for 3 hours and learn.
That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about at least my kids, I'm probably sure yours are the same.
Absolutely.
I got my oldest. He log in and do his homework at 2 a.m.
Right.
After he's done gaming for the day. After his friends went to bed or whatever. Yeah. And so they want that flexibility, and frankly, if we can't provide it, they'll find somebody who does.
Right. Yeah.
The education driven by the consumer. This is what Dean found as well. The education driven by the consumer rather than institution, and digital over analog. Those are trends. All right. So this is 2012. 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Our digital natives were 12. Well, a little older than that.
Yeah.
They were just probably 15, 20 years old. Now they're becoming the traditional and non-traditional student both. They're real close. They talked to older adults as well, and guess what older adults told them? We want affordable, unbundled, or stripped down versions of college.
Okay.
When asked about what they wanted, they said they want convenience, service, quality, and low cost, and only to be charged for the services and activities that they use. They did not want to pay for facilities they didn't use. They don't want to pay for events they don't participate in, or electives that they don't want to take. Essentially, they want the equivalent of a song, not an album.
Yeah.
This is 10 years ago. Adults.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense if you look at how cable and satellite has taken a hit to streaming, because you can pick and choose those channels or those networks that you want to watch. Yeah. And so, this makes perfect sense.
You can also see it with like DirecTV. They've gone away from the satellite altogether, and now they're just digitally streaming. At least that's what I just read, I think. So, it's pretty clear what the community, the students, both new digital natives and older adults, really want the same things.
Yeah.
Low cost, unbundled, 24/7, 365 access, where they can get what they need when they need it. New content producers and distributors also continue to enter the higher ed market space. Of course, what that does is it drives up competition for us, and consumer choice is driving down prices in these areas. And so Coursera is an example. They've got thousands of courses that they offer, and they give away tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of digital badges every year. Google, they've entered into the IT certificate. Probably remember that promotion. They have 5 courses that they can get 12 college credits for. Google awards them a digital badge. This can be completed by studying 5 hours a week. 5 hours a week for 6 months or less, depending on how quickly the student grasps the concepts. The first month's free, and then it's $48 a month after that. So 6 months, you're paying 6 times 150, those $300.
Yeah. You
can get a whole 12 credits. $300 for 12 credits.
Now, what is this tied to, though?
It's IT, the Google certificate. It's about IT.
But are they? But they're not partnering with higher ed at this point.
They are. They've got some higher ed partners, mostly private, that will award the credit. But Google is delivering the content.
Okay, and that's where I was going to go with. Does higher ed need to worry that these outsiders are going to come in and then
yes.
steal? Yeah, I don't want to say steal, but you know what I mean.
Yes. Well, it's not steal.
Yeah.
Because the consumers are making the choices.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is content's being provided that consumers prefer over the traditional higher ed space, and I can't emphasize that enough. It's not that we don't want things to be this way. It's right. Consumers are deciding, and at some point the students have spoken.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll know the answer to those questions pretty clearly when they start spending their money elsewhere.
Yeah.
So if you look at the product reviews for the Google certificate, it's looking at a satisfaction rate of about 4.7 out of 5.
Oh, wow.
So if you're thinking, well, it's a Google delivered thing and people really won't like it once they get into it, it's still online driven. Customer satisfaction, we're not talking about 10 responses, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of responses, and the average ranking is 4.7. So not only is consumers doing that, they also like it.
Yeah, right.
And so that's important to understand. There's also cybersecurity and web programming. Some of the web programming is pretty complex. It's HTML, CSS, which is old school web programming, but there's PHP, which is kind of a newer version, but then there's Python, JavaScript. Ruby and Swift are new languages that are offered by some Silicon Valley consortium of companies to students.
Mm-hmm.
Their model is different. It's a 6-month certificate. Student doesn't have to pay at all.
Really?
They don't pay at all. What the student does is commits to, once they guarantee the jobs, they complete the certificate, and then the first 2 years the students have to use a percentage of their pay to pay the company back.
Okay.
I can't compete with free education.
Right.
Nobody can.
Yeah.
In this traditional model.
Right.
Those kinds of, and there's Silicon Valley companies that are hiring these people to work in Silicon Valley companies. And so they know what they're getting, they know what they're needing. And so there was a response to the fact that they weren't getting enough graduates from the California schools that where people could do these things, where they could do Python programming, where they could do HTTP or PHP and so on. And so companies aren't going to wait.
Right.
They're going to enter into this space, and they're going to make it in a way where we have to provide this in a particular kind of way. So we've got to be very cognizant of those kind of models. And it isn't just work-based stuff. The Museum of Modern Art provided a post-war abstract painting course. Post-war, it sounds so university, right?
Right.
But it's the same financial model as the IT certificate. It's 27 hours. Students voted it 4.9 out of 5.
Wow.
Thousands of students. 55% of them within those cite a tangible benefit to their careers and their jobs by taking that course.
Wow.
So you can see there's a lot of stuff going on that we probably aren't we got our blinders up. We got to take a look around, see what's going on around us.
And when you say we, you're talking higher ed collectively.
In general, but,
yeah.
but most specifically, Shawnee as well.
Yeah.
Of course, the industrial model of higher education focuses, and this is going to answer your question about competency-based and unbundling. The industrial model that we learned that failed in the other three industries focused on time, focused on process, and it focused on teaching, right? The industrial model of higher ed, the credit hour. It's time. You got to spend 15 hours a week, lecture, 30 hours a week, lab, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Certificates, 15, or, X amount of credits, associate degree, 60 credits, bachelor's degree, 120 credits. I think that time, process, and teaching model is going to be eclipsed in the new knowledge economy because we're rooted in outcomes. That's what students want, outcomes and learning. There's three reasons for this. I think first, educationally, outcomes are more important than process. Simple analogy. Do you want your clothes washed or you want your clothes clean?
Clean. So
the process of washing isn't as important as having clean clothes. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's also important.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. It's not the process of teaching; it's the outcome of learning that's important.
Yeah.
It's time independent. If it takes me 20 seconds to learn something, great. If it takes me 2 hours or 2 weeks to learn something, that's fine too. I'm good with that as long as I learned it. The process of how I got there isn't as important as the outcome itself. That's why competency-based is important. Process is more important than time. Equity, another reason, second reason. We're currently focused on providing access to resources for the same period of time. That's not equity, it's equality. Real equity would be helping all students achieve the same outcome by providing individualized resources to them to help them master and achieve what they want to learn. So equity is not about access as much as it is about access to equal outcomes.
Gotcha.
Not access to equal process or time. So getting students to bus in and take a course so that they can take a 15 or a 30-hour course without addressing their individual needs and helping them achieve the same outcome isn't equity. It's equality. And that's why there has been a shift in language over the last 5 years is to that focus on equity. True equity is helping everybody achieve the same outcome.
And some may need more help than others in building that.
Exactly. And so providing those so using AI and VR, helping them and providing them resources to help them with, their personalized babysitting, food, the things that we're doing with our food. Those are all good things that help provide that moves us towards providing more of an equitable outcome for students. So then the third thing is the current model requires all educational experiences to be converted into time. Again, courses, credit hours, seat time, and degrees. Outcomes aren't bound by those. Because we all learn at different rates. We all learn differently. We all have different personal experiences that contribute to our learning or detract from our learning. And so because of those, that industrial model is going to collapse eventually. Because it clearly happened in the music, the other three industries, consumers will collapse this.
Yeah.
And there's so much competition out there right now for this that it's going to accelerate faster than we would like it to or want it to. So all of this is the lessons to learn from the look back, the look forward, and the look around. So let's talk about the strategic plan for the college. If you look and focus on goal 1, it's all about new program development and focusing on local needs.
Right.
I don't think we can worry about competition from other higher education spaces or other institutions. We got to look at and focus on our regional needs. And so our board has said we're not going to do new programs where jobs can't get locally. Mm-hmm. That's the right move.
Yeah.
It is exactly the right move. There are all kinds of things that we could do, biomedical programs, aviation programs, but those students aren't going to work here.
Right.
They're going to work somewhere else.
Yeah.
And and as it relates to currently how we pay for this is, basically a third of our costs are related to tuition. So a student only pays a third of what it really costs to educate them. Mm. The state pays for almost 40% about 50% really of what they cost, and then the other 10% is the local tax base. So about 60% roughly of what it costs to educate a student is being paid for by the taxpayer.
Gotcha.
And the students and our tuition is still high, and so they feel like, wow, this is so tough, not to crack, but the taxpayer investment in that student is pretty substantial. And when that student goes and works outside of our region and doesn't contribute to our local economy or the civic needs or responsibilities that higher education should perform, then that's an investment lost. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that we want to make sure that we understand. So our new program development is aimed at that. And so if you look at some of the new programs, we got to hold any of them. I think it went up to T or Z last night when we approved our new strategic plan. So hopefully those programs will serve our local economy, feed our local community residents the types of life-changing opportunities that they need in order to be happy and productive citizens within our community, which is our purpose. So,
yeah.
There's also pathways, and so we're starting to look at different pathways for students. The federal career cluster model has 16 different areas, and it starts with, agriculture and then business and IT and healthcare and construction and manufacturing and on and on and on. Within each of those clusters are pathways. And so like if you look at healthcare, there's 5 different pathways, and those therapeutic services, business services, and so on. And so within all of those are jobs. And so what we're trying to do is connect jobs that we know are available through a particular pathway that has learning associated with it.
Sure.
And so that's what that pathways discussion is about. Now, it gets kind of confusing because when you hear K-12 talk about pathways, their pathways are based off loosely federal career cluster model, which the state has adopted, but they're not the pathways in a K-12 aren't as robust as the federal model would suggest. And so it's easy to get confused about that because we use the same words, but we're being more intentional at the college and really connecting to the federal model and using the federal pathways as our guide, which will easily satisfy the states and the K-12 stuff. But there is a difference, and we're going to have to do a better job. You're going to have to help me do a better job of communicating what those differences are, so our community understands and can grow. Through our discussion, confidence and reliability is important.
Yeah.
And we have to provide our product in a way so that consumers, our students, our community is confident that we are giving them what they need and how they need it in the way that they want it.
How important is K-12 going to be in this transition?
Well, it is really important for lots of different reasons, but there's also some things that we have to do better outside of the K-12. So K-12 is everybody looks at community colleges, mainly the junior college model where the first 2 years of transfer. And so they forget that we have other purposes.
Sure.
The moving students right to work through an associate's degree or through a certificate, workforce training, which is where our focus in the future is probably going to be. There are some general, community education fun stuff that people want to do. I think that's a space for us in the future as well that we can do. And so the K-12s are our most likely customer because what's very apparent if you look at the data is, and I think I said this in one of the podcasts, when the 2008 crash happened and everybody was laid off, most of the jobs that required a high school diploma were lost.
Yeah.
And when the jobs came back, only a couple % of those were high school diploma related. So it's pretty clear that to be productive and earn a living and make the money that you need to make to support your family and want to make to increase your lifestyle habits and things, you're going to need some sort of post-secondary stuff. And so creating that connection with the high school students and helping them understand that there are options, but we got to provide them with broader options, I think, moving forward is important. Those high school, the other thing about that data that we shared when the jobs came back, and you look at what jobs are needed in the future with the disruption that technology is going to have, the AI. Mm-hmm. One could imagine a future where a nurse was no longer needed. Mm. Now, people are going to get on me for that, but the AI learns so fast, and there's so many different types of devices that you can communicate through Bluetooth or other technologies, and robotics, the advances there, where you could almost see where the nursing care piece will be replaced through technology. And if that's the case, technology is more reliable, more affordable. I don't think the healthcare industry is going to stay committed to putting people in nursing positions. And doctors, I've heard some doctors talk about, some doctors, general practitioners, having different models. They're seeing a proliferation of online home health care, not coming to the institution or the hospitals. All of that's going to disrupt that healthcare industry as well. So this is kind of a long answer to your high school question, but what that means is students are going to have to retrain, mm-hmm. or people are going to have to retrain as industries evolve, and that retraining is where the community college can really shine, mm-hmm. if we do it right, and we don't let the private companies bust us out. So I think creating that relationship at the high school age, and in my conversations with high school students and their parents is hey, and I say this, and hey, we don't care if you come to college. There's a Shawnee right now, and I really do, and I tell them that. I kind of turn it into a joke. But if we want them to be successful, we want them to be able to get into a job as quickly as possible. But we also know that they're always going to probably need us, and we want them to know that we're going to be there for them. If they've got helps or problems that they don't understand, something in higher education, financial aid's complex, admissions stuff, what's a registrar? Maybe you get to a university, you don't like it. Maybe you do like me and get flung out of the first couple of courses that you take at a university. You need to make them up. Shawnee can be there for you. So that relationship that we are bonding with our high school students, because they're in a sense a captured audience for us, I think is important, not only for that transition, which we often focus on only, but for future years, 5 years out, 10 years out. If they're still in our region,
right,
we want to help them change their lives and lifestyles too.
Sure.
So I think that's the important piece of the college, or the high school stuff. The downside of that, we can't rely on it, because demographically, the high school population is shrinking. Right. We're seeing the demographic shift to the south and west here in our region. Yeah. And while it used to be 700 high school graduates a year, I think last year dipped below 500. Yeah. And that trend looks like it's going to continue for quite a few years, looking at the K-12 data. So we've got to do a better job of helping them get here, take more classes, which, as we talk about fixing our processes, is providing ways that they can get more courses in the same time. Yeah. At least in this traditional model, moving forward. And then transferring to the institution, if that's what they want to do, in a way where they're not losing their credits and so forth. So I think that's real important that we're working on these pathways, is to help our students, but also creating opportunities for adult learners to participate in this. So we've got a lot of underemployed individuals in our community. We've got a lot of people who could benefit from having a little bit of higher education, getting some certificates, but they're working. And it's hard to do that when you're scheduling everything Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to noon.
Right.
When they're at work. So we're going to have to really do a better job, and that's what you see in our strategic plan of us reaching out and trying to engage or create opportunities, I think, for working adults to participate in this process. You see a lot of goals aimed at business modernization. Admissions, we just purchased some software, that EAB thing that Student Services wanted to do, admissions, financial aid. We going to be purchasing some human resource stuff to help us modernize our practices. Our physical resources, we're working on this capital plan. So all of the things that we're trying to do is anticipate what's going on in the community and restructure our business practices so that we can so we can really aims at lowering costs. I can't compete with free.
Right.
We can't compete with free. $140 a credit hour isn't going to work long term. We got to figure out how do we do this cheaper. And one of the things we do this cheaper is leverage our business practices, facilitate it 24/7, 365. So that's what we have to start looking at that, and that's what I'm challenging our teams to do, is to kind of figure out how can we do this better? How can we lower our costs to the student and the community member? Important. What happens if we don't?
We become a Spirit Halloween store.
Exactly. So that's the third goal. Of course, you see something in there about expanding partnerships, regional, especially. Those are not just university partnerships, and we're going to need to do that, but also business partnerships, engaging with businesses. And so this is kind of the tip of that iceberg of where we start working with businesses to create customized learning opportunities for individuals. And then there's, again, the last thing that is in our strategic plan and our board finance committee, there's something in there, develop a long-term financial plan. And that's really looking at what's a good revenue model for us? How can we lower those costs? How can we expand equity to all of our community residents and our low-income families? That's important for us to do. And so that's the purpose of our plan. Again, we had these things in place long before Levine and Van Pelt's work came out, but Levine and Van Pelt's work really helps us explain why we were able to do what we need to do with our strategic plan. So at this point, I'm challenging all of our employees to think about these things, to consider it, and understand the impact. If we want to continue to do business as usual, we can, but the answer to that question is for how long.
Right.
And as a president, I can't in good conscience tell you that it's not going to be forever. I can't in good conscience tell you it's going to be for 5 years even.
Right.
And so we've got to work together, and I think by working together we can really come up with some creative and innovative stuff, and hopefully we can get ready for the disruption that's likely to occur in our business and be part of it and be leaders in it, and that's where I hope that we can be.
It's an exciting time, to say the least.
It is. It's scary, but it's also exciting.
Yeah. Anything else, Dr. Taylor, you want to add before we wrap up this week's show?
No, I mean, I would appreciate anybody that wants to challenge what I've said, ask questions about it. I think it's important for us to do that, to have conversations. But know, at least, while I'm president and the board is the board, our North Star is headed this direction. And if you want to go a different direction, you'll probably need another board and another president. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Very well said. Thank you for opening up some eyes and some ears to this conversation, these topics. And again, as Dr. Taylor said, if you have a question or propose an opposing viewpoint, or want to express your agreeance, you can email us anytime, podcasts@shawneecc.edu. We'll invite you on to be a guest. We will have your comments read here as well, but we'd love for you to participate in our discussions as well.
Thank you all for listening to these podcasts. We really appreciate it, and hopefully it makes a difference for you.
Thank you again, and have a great week.